Hello everyone, it's Jamal Thomas. Welcome to the Progressive Soapbox. So I hope everyone is doing okay today. It is Monday at 3 p.m. Got a little bit of a late start today, so I have a few videos that I really want to get to. So I'm going to blaze through a few of these, stopping at probably the last video or so to talk and discuss with the audience. Um, oh, got a new mic. Well, at the very least, my mic is fixed, so that's great. Hope everyone can hear me okay with no issue. I love being able to give historical context when I do a story. Like I love it. I love it. I get a kick out of history stuff. So this story affords me a bombshell, and b historical context to make that bombshell to give it life. Because the fact is, people sometimes think history is boring. I know when I was going through school, I used to think history was boring. And then when I got older and I started seeing this stuff in the political context of today, I was fascinated by it. I was utterly fascinated by it. Um, hey Jamal, it might just be my phone, but I can't hear you super well. Uh, let's see. Hey y'all, can you hear me? Is that anybody else? Thanks for keeping me occupied while I'm at work, Jamal. You've got another mic again. Great. Lisa, you may have to turn up your volume. Other people are saying they can hear me okay. Volume is a bit low. Okay, it's not just you. We need your shrew. All right, so after this video, I will switch my mics back to my other one if the volume is too low. Sounds fine to me. All right, so I'm just gonna run with it. I can't change the mic on this one. And we'll see how other people say it. Some people's channel might be a little off. Okay. All right, so I like historical context. When you look at history, look at it as if it's taking place now. Like if you were living through the moment, look at it as if you were there, breathing the air, inhaling what's taking place, and that you're a part of the zeitgeist. Because the fact is, you are. I mean, the stuff that's taking place then, oftentimes, that stuff repeats itself, or at the very least, like they say, rhymes. And it is difficult, if not impossible, to look at what takes place today with any kind of real understanding of context if you don't necessarily know what took place then. Back in 1980, when President Carter was running against cowboy or fake cowboy Ronald Reagan, people were terrified with Ronald Reagan just like they were terrified with Donald Trump. But nevertheless, you had some people who were in Ronald Reagan's camp. Nevertheless, in some of these operations, former retired CIA agents essentially created or ran this operation while they were spying on the Carter administration for Reagan. Now, any foreign policy decisions, this was 24-hour coverage, any foreign policy decision that Ronald Reagan or that President Carter was thinking about or considering was essentially ferreted back to Reagan. Now, this is amazing. This is amazing. The wild part about this is there is so much that was going on during that time. If you remember, this was during the Iranian hostage crisis. There was a revolution. And if I am not mistaken, there was even something going on where Reagan was working behind the scenes in order to kind of prolong that revolution. So when he takes office, he looks good because they released the hostages, just to put a knife in Jimmy Carter. But this is something separate. Ronald Reagan, under George H.W. Bush at the time, who ended up being his vice president, was essentially running a spy operation into the Carter campaign or Carter administration. Now, let's fast forward. Recently, the Republican or House Republicans have been doing this investigation where they've been looking like gangbusters into the stuff that's been taking place with regards to the FBI and DOJ. Now, we know that the Inspector General's report is going to come out, and the Inspector General has forwarded criminal charges or forwarded his information over to the prosecutor for criminal charges at problems within that investigation. There were a lot of problems in the way that they investigated Hillary Clinton, FBI, DOJ. Now, I think it's impossible to say that it is the way they investigated Hillary Clinton was off, but the way they investigated Donald Trump, seeing as these were the same people, was right. I think that would be a weird conversation to make. And what we find out is that the FBI had a mole into the Trump campaign. Now, the media came out saying, oh my God, we can't reveal this mole. We can't reveal this mole. If we reveal this mole, people could die. This is what the FBI was saying. This is some of what the spooks were saying. We can't reveal this person because people would die. And the media went right along with it, being stenographers, repeating it. The information was released. The person who was spying on the Trump campaign was the same guy that was spying on the Carter campaign for Reagan under the auspices of former retired CIA agents. Fucking amazing! Fucking amazing. The guy's name is Stefan Halper. And apparently Stefan Halper had been known going back for the last 50 years. Something else is interesting and weird, however you want to put it. We were told that all of this investigation of Trump and Russia collusion started with the drunken conversation with Papadopoulos. Come to find out, it started before that. Meaning the FBI had put this mole into the Trump campaign before the conversation with Papadopoulos. Meaning, before this stuff with Trump and Russia stuff was supposed to have really started, they were already spying into the Trump's campaign. This is amazing. Absolutely amazing. Glenn Greenwald is a fucking lion. This is The Intercept. The FBI informant who monitored the Trump campaign, Stefan Halper, oversaw a CIA spying operation in the 1980 presidential election. They recycled the same guy. I have two stories on this. One has to do with the way the media told this line and this failure and loss of legitimacy and credibility. If you're really going to say that people are going to die by releasing this guy, and then this guy's releasing, you find out that this was the common house name spook that everybody knew about from the standpoint of media, then what are you doing? You just lied. Like, you just lied on a massive scale. And you lied knowing that you were lying, knowing that this guy was this common spook that all of these other people knew about, and yet you were pretending as if people were going to die if this information was released. I always ask this question of, are they lying or are they incompetent? And it seems in this case, they were just not telling the truth. Let's take a look at the article. This is Glenn Greenwald. The man is a lion. I love him to death. FBI informant who monitored the Trump campaign, Stefan Halper, oversaw a CIA spying operation in the 1980 presidential election. An extremely strange episode has engulfed official Washington over the last 2 weeks. I like he said that, official Washington. Because it's making the point that there's a reality and there's the thing that happens over top of the reality that people act as if is reality. Engulfed official Washington over the last 2 weeks came a truly bizarre conclusion on Friday night, and it revolves around a long-time, highly sketchy CIA operative, Stefan Halper. Over the past several weeks, House Republicans have been claiming that the FBI during the 2016 election used an operative to spy on the Trump campaign and triggered outrage within the FBI by trying to learn his identity. How dare you learn who we were using to spy on your campaign with? The controversy escalated when President Donald Trump joined the fray on Friday morning. Reports are there were indeed at least one FBI representative implanted for political purposes into my campaign for president, Trump tweeted, adding, "It took place very early on and long before the phony Russian hoax became a hot fake news story. If true, all-time biggest political scandal." And again, you can dislike Trump, but he's not wrong. He's not wrong. He's not wrong in the least. Trump screamed that people were spying on his campaign, and come to find out people were spying on his campaign. However bad we thought it was, it ended up being worse because all of this stuff essentially took place before this Trump and Russia stuff became even a real thing. Let's keep going. The FBI has some explaining to do. Let's put it lightly. In response, the DOJ and FBI's various media spokesmen did not deny the core accusations, but quibbled with the language. The FBI used an informant, not a spy. Oh, they're moderates. They're not rebels or terrorists. They're moderates. And they began using increasingly strident language to warn that exposing his name would jeopardize his life and those of others, and also put American national security at grave risk. On May 8th, the Washington Post described the informant as a top-secret intelligence source and cited DOJ officials as arguing that the disclosure of his name could risk lives by potentially exposing the source, a U.S. citizen who's provided intelligence to the CIA and the FBI. Sad excuse for a Democrat, Mark Warner comes out saying that there could be charges by trying to expose his identity. Warner, identifying FBI source to undermine the Russia probe could be a crime. Think about that. He's saying if you even try to figure out who was spying on his campaign, it could be a crime. But now, as a result of some odd choices by national largest media outlets, everyone knows the name of the FBI's informant, Stefan Halper. And Halper's history is quite troubling, particularly his central role in the scandal in the 1980s election. Equally troubling are the Department of Justice and the FBI's highly inflammatory, at best misleading claims that they made to prevent Halper's identity from being reported. To begin with, it's obviously notable that the person that the FBI used to monitor the Trump campaign is the same person who worked as a CIA operative running the 1980 presidential election spying campaign. Think about that. They dredged this guy up, going all the way back to the 80s. This is amazing. And then they went and they say, look, this guy did a great job spying on the Carter administration. Why reinvent the wheel? Let's use the same guy. With one caveat. We were embarrassed when they exposed the fact that we were spying on the Carter administration. So let's come up with a reason this time around. Let's create a framework that would allow us to do this spying. Let's create a framework. I know, Trump and Russia. Let's use Trump's collusion with Russia or Trump's bromance with Vladimir Putin to slay Donald Trump. A lot of this sounds like Democratic playbook. This is why I'm extraordinarily skeptical of the FBI and the DOJ on this. And I don't like the incentives. Let's say it that way. They have certain incentives to behave in a particular way in this, but I'll talk about it afterwards. Let's do the story first. The New York Times in 1983 said the Reagan campaign spying operation involved a number of retired CIA agency officials and was highly secretive. The article, by then NYT reporter Leslie Gleb, added that its source identified Stefan Halper, a campaign aide involved in providing 24-hour news updates and policy ideas to the traveling Reagan party, as the person in charge. Halper, now 73, had also worked with Donald Rumsfeld, Dick Cheney, and Alexander Haig as part of the Nixon administration. When the scandal first broke in 1983, the UPI suggested that Halper's handler for this operation was Reagan's presidential candidate, George H.W. Bush, who had been the CIA director and worked with Halper's father-in-law, former CIA Deputy Director Ray Klein, who worked on Bush's 1980 presidential campaign before Bush ultimately became Ronald Reagan's vice president. And just so you can see for yourself, Reagan aides describes operation to gather inside data on Carter. It's amazing. Absolutely amazing. I didn't know anything about this. In 2016, top officials from the intelligence community similarly rallied around Hillary Clinton as The Intercept has previously documented. Former acting CIA director Michael Morrell not only endorsed Clinton in the New York Times, but claims that Mr. Putin had recruited Mr. Trump as an unwitting agent of the Russian Federation. George W. Bush CIA and NSA director Michael Hayden pronounced Trump a clear and present danger to the United States national security, and then, less than a week before the election, went to Washington Post to warn that Donald Trump really does sound a lot like Vladimir Putin, and said Trump is the useful fool, some naif, manipulated by Moscow, secretly held in contempt, but whose blind support is happily accepted and exploited. Add to this, Comey coming out saying that he thought Donald Trump was this kind of clear and present threat, and that he was working in a world that Hillary Clinton was going to get elected. It's like, what? What do you mean you were working in a world that Hillary Clinton was going to get elected? Why are you even telling me that? What does Hillary Clinton potentially get elected having to do with your investigation? Apparently had something to do with it. So as it turns out, the informant used by the FBI in 2016 to gather information on the Trump campaign was not some previously unknown top secret asset whose exposure as an operative could jeopardize lives. Quite the contrary, his decades of work for the CIA, including his role in an obviously unethical, if not criminal spying operation during the 1980s presidential campaign, is quite publicly known. That's amazing. In contrast to this picture purposely painted by the Department of Justice and its allies that his informant was some super secret, high-level, covert intelligence asset, the New York Times described him as what he actually is. The informant is well known in Washington circles, having served in previous Republican administrations and as a source of information for the CIA in the past years. Look, okay, there's one other problem with this. Yeah, before I go into it, there's one other problem with this. The New York Times reported prior that all of this started, meaning the whole Trump and Russia collusion, Trump and Russian investigation. We got to have this investigation into Trump because of this drunken conversation with Papadopoulos. Then we have the PP dossier. And then you find out that the person who gave this tip off also gave money to the foundation, Clinton Foundation, meaning there's a connection to the Clinton Foundation. You find out that the information for the FISA warrant was, it was, certain information was never told to the judge. Um, and you find out that the people who were instrumental in getting Hillary Clinton off, meaning changed the language to make sure she's not perp walked, were also instrumental in getting this kind of search stuff on Donald Trump with the Russian collusion stuff from the standpoint of investigating them. I would agree that Donald Trump made the situation worse for himself by essentially firing Comey and some other stuff, but nevertheless, all of this seems like nonsense, and yet it's pushed nonetheless. The Washington Post, or the New York Times, the New York Times said that all of this started with the drunken conversation with Papadopoulos. But come to find out, the spook was there before the drunken conversation with Papadopoulos, meaning Donald Trump is right on the second point, that all of this exceeded the drunken conversation, meaning they were spying on his campaign before Papadopoulos had that conversation and before all of this was supposedly kicked off. Let's keep going. To begin with, the New York Times reported in December of last year that the FBI investigation into possible ties with the Trump campaign in Russia began with George Papadopoulos drunkenly boasted to an Australian diplomat about Russian dirt on Hillary Clinton. It was the disclosure of this episode by the Australians that led to the FBI to open an investigation into 2016 into Russian attempts to disrupt the election and whether any of President Donald Trump's associates conspired, the New York Times claimed. But it now seems clear that Halper's attempts to gather information for the FBI began before that. The professor's interaction with Trump advisors began a few weeks before the opening of the investigation when Page met with the professor at British Symposium, the Post reported. While it's not rare for the FBI to gather information before formally opening an investigation, Halper's earlier snooping does call into question the accuracy of the New York Times claim that it was a drunken Papadopoulos ramblings that first prompted the FBI's interest into the possible connections. And it suggests that the CIA operatives, apparently working with at least some faction within the FBI, were trying to gather information about Trump campaign earlier than previously reported. Look, I understand that people don't like Trump. I don't particularly like Trump myself. I think he's a disgusting, horrible person. And as he's been in that office, I've liked him less and less and less. But this is different. Like, we're talking about something that goes beyond just the particular person in the office. This goes into whether you want the intelligence services working at the behest of one of the campaigns. We know that Comey was told to change the language of the case, which is mind-blowing in and of itself. I always make this argument that the government is a bus, and that you have people who are driving the bus, but those people don't necessarily own the bus, nor do they have carte blanche to the bus itself. They have to get elected. They have to get their asses in those seats, meaning by public support. The idea that the bus driver or somebody in one of the seats in the bus, and it's getting somewhat strained, but you know what I mean. The idea that the FBI itself or the Department of Justice would contort an investigation to try to sound like one of the campaigns is problematic. The idea that Hillary Clinton or that Bill Clinton would meet with the Attorney General during an open investigation is problematic. All of these things are problematic. The idea that the people who are instrumental in getting the Trump campaign turned on in regards to these FISA warrants and everything else were also instrumental in getting Hillary Clinton off the hook is problematic. The incentives built into this are clear, and yet those incentives are completely ignored by media who takes it as impossible that the FBI would be working in cahoots with one of the parties. All of these people come out saying that they think Donald Trump is a clear and present threat, but none of those people would do anything about the fact that they think Trump is a clear and present threat. Despite the fact they're working in the shadows, oftentimes in other governments, with these kind of black operations. We know that they've done it before in the past in regards to spying on an operation. And in no way, we know that the Hillary Clinton campaign was talking about using Trump and Russia in order to slay Donald Trump. And what do you know? What do you know? Here we are. Trump and Russia. Trump collusion. And then the Trump and Russia collusion is morphed into a porn star getting money from a porn star. I mean, this stuff has become insane at this point. We've gone for 2 years. They've been able to show nothing on this, and yet they've run with it. I'm making a point that if they looked an ounce into Hillary Clinton's Clinton Foundation with the level of scrutiny that they've applied to Donald Trump, oh God, talking about the floodgates. But they didn't. They didn't do that. They weren't interested in that. If they were looking for these foreign governments who are taking interest, again, it's not that big of a deal. They don't want to say anything about it. It's not that big of a deal. They focus on Donald Trump, even though they haven't necessarily been able to nail anything down to Donald Trump with this Russia stuff. And what we find out is they were spying on his campaign long before people knew that they were spying on his campaign. I find this to be amazing, and I don't understand why other people look at this and think this is not a big deal. Yeah, the FBI was spying on one of the campaigns, so what? It's like, but yeah, it seems like he was doing so at the behest of one of the other parties, or at the very least one of the other campaigns. That's a problem. That's a problem. That's an extreme problem. And yet, nobody cares. So I'm going to end this here. This one is going long. I may cut this video just to shrink it a little bit, but Jesus Christ, this one is going almost like an hour. All right, so I'm going to end this here. All right, guys, if you enjoy the content, please feel free to share, like, subscribe, and of course, you guys can always support through Patreon. Thanks, guys.